Have you ever wondered how many truths have been buried throughout the centuries? How many secrets the history of the Church preferred to hide rather than reveal? Among these hidden stories, there is one that still sends chills down the spines of scholars and religious experts today. A gospel written by a woman, but not just any woman. Mary Magdalene, the woman who witnessed the most sacred moments in Christian history, the one who, according to ancient texts, was the first to see the resurrected Christ. Her figure both loved and hated, revered and silenced. Why would the Church fear her words so much? What was in her pages that was so dangerous to be known? Today, we are going to dive into the shadows of the Church's forbidden history. This is not a theory. It's not a modern legend. It's a real record and a manuscript hidden for centuries, only recovered by accident. And when it came to light, the questions began. Get ready. What you are about to hear might change the way you see faith, the Church, and even the role of women in the origins of Christianity. But before we begin, I want to know, do you enjoy uncovering the Church's hidden mysteries? Then subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to follow everything we are revealing. And tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? I'll read every comment because together we are breaking the silence of centuries. In the 1800s, the Egyptian desert guarded something that seemed forgotten by time itself. Nomadic shepherds, searching for shelter from the scorching heat, stumbled upon a cave with a narrow entrance. Inside, a clay urn rested, as if someone had placed it there out of fear or reverence. When they opened the urn, they found ancient manuscripts, fragile like dried leaves. They didn't understand what they were and didn't care. They sold them to local traders. But years later, experts in religious texts identified the impossible. Among the scrolls, there was a work never mentioned in the Bibles we know. It was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And the strangest part, it didn't speak about sins or repentance. It spoke about secret revelations, hidden teachings that Jesus had entrusted only to her. Why would Mary, a female disciple, have access to truths that even Peter didn't know? This gospel was about to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the early days of Christianity. Before we understand the explosive content of the gospel, we need to understand who this woman really was, the one history tried to reduce to a mere repentant sinner. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute, as many believe. That version was a construction of the Church, centuries after her death. In the oldest Gospels, Mary is described as a faithful follower, someone close to Jesus, so close that she was called the Apostle of the Apostles. She was the first witness of the resurrection. But why Mary? Why not Peter, John, or James? What was there between Mary and Jesus that the other disciples didn't share? This is where the forbidden gospel becomes dangerous. It suggests that Jesus revealed secret teachings to Mary, deep spiritual wisdom that only she could understand. This placed Mary in a position of spiritual leadership, and for a church consolidating itself into a male-dominated hierarchical structure, that was unacceptable. Mary had to be erased, or at the very least reduced to a lesser figure, and so began a smear campaign that would last for centuries. The Gospel of Mary is short, fragmented, only part of it survived, but what remains is enough to understand why its message was considered dangerous. In the words of the manuscript, Mary recounts that after Christ's death, the disciples were overwhelmed by fear. They didn't know how to continue the mission. It was Mary who stood up and brought forth a secret message that Jesus had entrusted to her. The message spoke of the spiritual nature of the soul, the inner search for God, and a direct connection between each person and the divine. There was no need for a temple or sacrifice. The kingdom of God was not outside, it was within each person. This teaching shattered the need for a centralized power structure. If each person could find God within themselves, why would they need a hierarchy at all? This gospel not only returned spiritual power to the individual, but also highlighted a woman as the keeper of these truths. It was a double threat to male authority and to the very structure of the Church itself. Over time, the Gospel of Mary disappeared. It was rejected by the councils that decided which books would enter the official Bible. mystical and spiritual teachings gave way to a doctrine built on obedience and control. Mary was reduced to a secondary figure. She was turned into a symbol of sin and redemption, a convenient narrative for a church that needed to keep women away from spiritual power. But secrets do not die easily. They sleep, and like that jar in the desert, one day they are found again. Today, as we look at these fragmented pages, we are not just reading an ancient text. We are rescuing a silenced voice. We are revisiting a story that was stolen from humanity. And most importantly, we are asking ourselves, what else has been hidden from us? How many forbidden gospels are still buried? How many truths are waiting to be discovered? If you want to continue this journey with me and uncover the next chapters of this story, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and explore our other videos about the church's hidden mysteries. And don't forget, leave your name and your city here in the comments. I want to know where you are joining us from in this search for the forbidden truth. When we talk about Mary Magdalene, almost everyone has the same image in mind. The repentant sinner, kneeling at the feet of Jesus, washing his feet with her tears and drying them with her hair. That image is powerful, and it was created, not by accident, but as part of a much larger strategy. Mary Magdalene's name appears in several canonical Gospels, but the curious thing is that, despite her obvious importance, her story is fragmented, distorted, and in many cases, deliberately obscured. The truth is that from the earliest centuries, the church had to decide who would become its heroes and who would be cast into the shadows. Mary Magdalene knew too much. She saw what no other apostle saw. She heard what no one else heard. And according to the forbidden gospel, Jesus chose her as the guardian of spiritual mysteries that the others could not comprehend. But why a woman? Why someone outside the traditional male leadership? And most disturbing of all, why did this gospel disappear while texts of far less importance were preserved and canonized? The answer takes us directly to the heart of a conspiracy of silence, chaos where Mary's voice had to be smothered so that a new structure of power could rise. It wasn't just theological, it was political, it was strategic. The year is 325 AD. The Roman Empire is divided. Christianity, once persecuted, is now beginning to gain acceptance. But that acceptance comes at a price. For this new religion to become official, it needs unity. And unity demands a single narrative. Constantine, the emperor, calls the council of Nicaea. At this historic event, church leaders gather to decide which texts will be considered sacred and which will be rejected. This is the moment when the first version of the Bible, as we know it, begins to take shape. Gospels with simple, clear messages that aligned with the new power structure were accepted. Gospels that spoke of a direct connection with the divine, bypassing the need for any hierarchical intermediaries, were discarded. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene was one of them. A text where a woman receives revelations even greater than those given to the male apostles. A text where there is no need for grand temples or rigid dogmas. All of this was far too dangerous for the new imperial church, and so Mary was silenced. Not because she lacked importance, but precisely because she was too important. Silencing her was essential for building a church controlled from the top down, where spiritual power remained in the hands of a few. But simply silencing Mary wasn't enough. Her memory needed to be reshaped, and that's exactly what happened. In the year 591, Pope Gregory the Great delivered a sermon that would forever change the way the world saw Mary Magdalene. Without any biblical basis, Gregory declared that Mary Magdalene and the adulterous woman who washed Jesus' feet were the same person. It was a subtle manipulation, but a powerful one. By merging these figures, Mary was transformed from spiritual, disciple and apostle into a sexual sinner, someone who needed redemption. The message was clear: wise and spiritual women were a threat, repentant and submissive women were acceptable. This narrative took root. For centuries, Mary Magdalene was painted as a repentant prostitute. Few questioned why. Even fewer dared to ask what agenda lay behind this defamation, until the forbidden gospel resurfaced. Fast forward to the 20th century. The year is 1896. A team of archaeologists works in the Egyptian desert, near the city of Akhmim. Among fragments of deteriorated papyrus, they find something astonishing. An unknown text written in Coptic, a language derived from ancient Egyptian. As they translate the text, the shock is undeniable. It was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Not a complete copy, several pages were missing. But what survived was enough to trigger a theological earthquake. In this Gospel, Mary is not a sinner, nor is she submissive. She is a spiritual master, intimately connected to secret teachings that Jesus entrusted to her alone. She speaks about the true nature of the soul, about the illusion of the material world, and about how true salvation does not come from outside, but from within. She also confronts the jealousy of Peter and the other male apostles who refuse to accept that a woman was chosen to safeguard such profound teachings. It is a revolutionary text because it dismantles the patriarchal vision that shaped early Christianity. You might be wondering, if we already know all this, why does the church still avoid talking about this gospel? Why does Mary Magdalene remain such an ambiguous figure in official teachings? The answer is simple: because Mary's message is still dangerous today. If every human being can access the divine directly, with no intermediaries, no rigid dogmas, and no temples made of stone, then the entire religious hierarchy collapses. If a woman, in a time when women were invisible, could become the keeper of deep spiritual knowledge, then what stops any woman or any ordinary man from doing the same today? Mary's message reminds us that the sacred belongs to no clergy. It lives within every soul. It burns in the sincere search of every human being. And that is the greatest threat to any institution built on controlling spirituality. So I ask you, the one watching right now, have you ever suspected that some truths were hidden from humanity? Have you ever felt that the official story doesn't tell the whole truth? If you want to continue this journey with me and uncover even more secrets buried in the shadows of history, subscribe to the channel and follow our upcoming videos. And tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? I want to know who the seekers of truth are, the ones joining me in this mission to bring hidden knowledge back into the light. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene is nothing like the texts you find in your Bible. It doesn't begin with a genealogy. It doesn't describe spectacular miracles or apocalyptic prophecies. It contains no sermons for the crowds or theological debates. This Gospel is intimate, personal, a record of deep spiritual dialogues, almost like a diary of revelations. In it, Mary is not just a follower, she is an interpreter of the sacred, someone who received secrets about the true nature of the soul and the spiritual universe. And this is where we begin to understand the real reason for its censorship. Early Christianity, organized by an emerging ecclesiastical hierarchy, needed a simple doctrine: obey, believe, accept. But what Mary revealed was the opposite: question. Seek within yourself, transform your own consciousness. The early church offered salvation through obedience to doctrine. Mary spoke of inner liberation, a personal journey, with no need for mediators or institutions. It was a mystical Christianity, dangerous to those who wanted to control bodies, minds, and souls. Among the fragmented passages that have reached us, there is a stunning revelation. Mary describes the human soul as a light, traveling through different spiritual realms. Each realm is a stage of purification, a confrontation between the soul and its own shadows. There is no mention of a fiery hell or an external judgment. According to Mary, the real judgment happens within the soul itself. We are confronted by our own fears, desires, and attachments. Each obstacle overcome brings the soul closer to the true divine light, which is not found in some distant heaven but at the very center of our being. This is radically different from the doctrine of sin and punishment adopted by later church councils. For Mary, the greatest enemy of the soul is not some external demon, but spiritual ignorance itself. Not knowing oneself is the real condemnation. Knowing one's own divine essence is liberation. One of the most controversial passages in the Forbidden Gospel is a confrontation between Mary and Peter. Mary shares with the apostles the secret revelation she received directly from Jesus. Peter, filled with disbelief and perhaps jealousy, asks, "Why would he speak with a woman and not with us?" This moment is powerful. It's not just a personal conflict. It's a mirror of what was happening within the early Christian community itself. There was an unspoken struggle between a mystical, inclusive Christianity with strong female presence and an institutional, hierarchical, and male-dominated Christianity. The text leaves no doubt. Jesus entrusted spiritual secrets to Mary because her heart was ready. Not because she was a woman or a man, but because her soul was open. Gender was irrelevant to true wisdom, but to Peter and many others, this was unacceptable. If Mary was the guardian of sacred mysteries, what role was left for them? This apostolic jealousy would echo for centuries, turning into doctrine, exclusion, and eventually, complete silence. Another fascinating part of this gospel describes a spiritual journey through 7 gates or 7 powers. Each power represents an inner obstacle, a shadow of the soul that must be confronted and transformed. The 7 powers are darkness, desire, ignorance, false, euphoria, spiritual, pride, fear, rage of the flesh, notice. These powers are not external demons, but inner aspects of the human psyche. Every soul in its quest for spiritual ascension must face its own shadows. This vision is deeply transformative. There is no external savior coming to rescue us. Salvation is a journey of profound self-knowledge. The path to God necessarily passes through our wounds and our deepest fears. This is mature, liberating spirituality and dangerously incompatible with any religion built on control. When you read these passages, it becomes crystal clear why this gospel had to be buried. It shatters the idea that we are hopeless sinners, dependent on an institution for forgiveness. It restores to each individual the power of their own salvation. But there's something even deeper. The Gospel of Mary does not speak of a religion. It speaks of a direct experience of the divine. It speaks of expanded consciousness, of a soul awakened, capable of recognizing the divine light not only in temples or scriptures, but in every breath, in every particle of our own being. It's such an advanced spiritual vision that it directly echoes teachings from the East, like Buddhism and Hinduism. It's as if Jesus, through Mary, was pointing to a universal truth, one that transcends any single tradition, and perhaps this is the greatest reason for its suppression. Because this gospel proves that the sacred does not belong to any one religion. It is the birthright of every human soul, and a truth like that can never be monopolized. Now I ask you, if this message had been preserved from the very beginning, what would Christianity look like today? And even more importantly, what would our own spiritual search look like? If you want to continue uncovering these mysteries with me, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next revelations. And tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? Your search is also part of this story. If you believe that Mary Magdalene's story was an isolated case of spiritual censorship, it's time to expand your view. Because Mary was only the tip of a massive iceberg, an entire tradition of spiritual teachings and female spiritual leaders that were erased or distorted, so the church could build its absolute authority. Mary Magdalene represents a lineage almost no one talks about, the female spiritual tradition that existed in the early days of Christianity and was silenced. In the first centuries, hidden Christian communities worshipped not only Christ, but also Sophia, the divine wisdom, a sacred feminine presence. In these communities, women were spiritual leaders, prophetesses, and keepers of secrets. They performed baptisms, led ceremonies, and transmitted revelations. But as the church institutionalized itself, these women became inconvenient. If female, spirituality flourished, how could the church justify excluding them from its official hierarchy? Mary was the first victim of this erasure, but many others followed the same fate. And when Mary was turned into a sinner, every other spiritual woman was dragged into the same mud. To understand the world where Mary Magdalene stood out, we need to talk about the Gnostics. That word, which sounds mysterious today, comes from the Greek gnosis, meaning direct spiritual knowledge. The Gnostics did not believe in salvation through blind faith. For them, true redemption came through inner knowledge, through the awakening of the soul. This was the same vision found in the Gospel of Mary. In Gnostic communities, Mary Magdalene was seen as a master, an initiate into the deepest mysteries, not because she was Jesus' wife or anything like that, but because of her ability to dive into her own soul and reveal hidden truths. These mystical Christians read texts that today would be considered heretical, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and of course the Gospel of Mary. They believe Jesus did not come to create a religion, but to awaken a revolution of consciousness. He wasn't interested in founding dogmas, but in freeing each soul from the deep sleep of illusion. And who taught this path after the resurrection? Mary Magdalene. But this mystical Christianity, full of wise women and spiritual seekers, was a deadly threat to the emerging institutional church. After all, how do you control a faith that encourages every person to seek God for themselves? How do you build a hierarchy of the sacred lives equally within everyone? That's when a systematic theological persecution began. Official councils declared Gnostic texts heretical. Gnostic leaders were persecuted, their works burned, their communities scattered. The official church needed a distant God, sitting on a heavenly throne, accessible only through the church itself. Any doctrine that taught that God was within every human being had to be wiped out. Mary Magdalene, as a symbol of this direct spiritual tradition, had to be taken down. From spiritual master to public sinner, from keeper of mysteries to a symbol of shame and repentance. But Mary Magdalene was not just any woman. The forbidden gospel reveals a spiritual intimacy between her and Jesus that deeply unsettled the male apostles. It wasn't some vulgar romance, like many modern theories try to suggest. It was something much greater. Mary understood the Master in a way that went beyond words. She could read the hidden symbols in his teachings, perceive what others could not. She was, in the purest sense of the word, an initiate, not because of privileges, but because her soul was ready to see. This direct spiritual connection was scandalous to the early church leaders because it shattered the logic of male power. If a woman could access spiritual secrets directly from Christ, who else could? That risk was intolerable. And so Mary had to be replaced by a different image of femininity, Mary, the mother of Jesus. She would become the ideal woman for the church, silent, submissive, passive. Mary Magdalene, the active seeker, the enlightened teacher, was condemned to oblivion or infamy. But secrets do not die. They sleep. And in the 20th century, with the discovery of Gnostic texts at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, the truth began to emerge once more. Among those texts was the Gospel of Mary, but also the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says, "The one who drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become them." That is pure mystical teaching. No intermediaries, no hierarchy, only direct fusion between the soul and the divine. This vision echoes exactly what Mary taught. The kingdom of God is not a distant place, but an inner reality. And the key to this reality is not blind obedience, but deep self-knowledge. Today, centuries after her attempted erasure, Mary Magdalene rises again as a symbol of a spirituality that cannot be controlled, regulated, or sold. She represents every soul that dares to seek its own light, unafraid of the shadows, without needing permission from any external authority. And this is the most dangerous message of all for any system built on spiritual control. The divine belongs to everyone. The sacred is our natural inheritance, and no one has the right to tell us how to find it. If you feel that this search is also your own, if you feel there is something greater within you, an ancient call that was silenced but never forgotten, then this journey belongs to you too. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you can follow me as we uncover the hidden truths of faith. And tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? Your voice is also part of this historic recovery. If you've followed this far, you already understand that the story of Mary Magdalene is not just about one woman. It's about a deliberate erasure, not only of her voice, but of a whole spiritual path that was meant to empower every soul, regardless of gender, status, or position. But now we need to go even deeper. Because the forbidden gospel of Mary not only challenges the Church's official narrative, it also confronts something even more ancient, the fear of the sacred feminine. Long before Christianity, countless ancient cultures worshipped female deities, priestesses, and divine wisdom in its feminine form. The earth was seen as sacred, the womb was a portal of life, and women were seen as guardians of mysteries connected to the cycles of nature and the cosmos. This spiritual heritage did not disappear overnight. When Christianity emerged, many of these ancient traditions were still alive, and Mary Magdalene inherited this legacy. She was not only a disciple, she became a bridge between the feminine mysteries of the past and the revelations of the new spiritual era brought by Jesus. This is why her erasure was so necessary to the rising church. In a male-dominated structure, there could be no room for female leadership, much less one rooted in mystical authority. The Gospel of Mary threatened to resurrect this ancient lineage, where wisdom, not obedience, was the key to the divine. It spoke of inner transformation, not external rituals. It placed each soul, man or woman, as a direct channel of divine light. This was too dangerous for an institutional church that needed to control not only beliefs but also bodies, especially women's bodies. By erasing Mary Magdalene and replacing her with the image of a repentant prostitute, the church sent a clear message: female spirituality is dangerous unless it submits to male authority. Women could only participate in spiritual life as symbols of purity or sin, never as autonomous spiritual leaders. But the forbidden gospel refuses to disappear. Its message is like a seed, buried but still alive, waiting for the right time to sprout again. And perhaps that time is now. Among the most revolutionary passages in the Gospel of Mary, there is a profound teaching about the illusion of separation. Mary says that the soul forgets its divine origin when it becomes entangled in the illusions of the material world. The real sin is this forgetting, the disconnection from our own divine light. Salvation, therefore, is not about following rules or rituals, but about remembering who we truly are. It is a journey of remembrance, a return to the inner temple where God has always lived. This is not just spiritual theory, it's a radical spiritual psychology, thousands of years ahead of its time. What Mary describes aligns closely with what modern mystics and even depth psychology teach today: the idea that our suffering comes from forgetting our divine identity, from losing ourselves in external illusions. Another striking revelation in Mary's Gospel is how she describes Jesus' role. He is not the gatekeeper who controls access to God. He is a spiritual mirror showing each person their own divine face. His purpose was not to demand worship, but to awaken the Christ within each soul. This completely reverses the official religious narrative. In institutional Christianity, Jesus is placed on a pedestal, infinitely above humanity. In the Gospel of Mary, Jesus walks beside us, showing us that we carry the same divine light within. This teaching is so powerful because it removes the need for intermediaries. It reminds each of us that we already have what we seek. We just forgot how to see it. And once again, this directly threatens every system built on spiritual dependency. If every soul can find the divine within, why would you need priests, bishops, or popes to grant you access? If God lives within you, no temple can contain him. No institution can own him. No dogma can define him. This is the true heresy of the Gospel of Mary. Not because it denies Christ, but because it dares to remind us that we are all divine beings in the process of remembering ourselves. This is the original gospel, the good news that was too dangerous to be preserved. And now, in the 21st century, that message is coming back. Not because an institution allows it, but because souls all over the world are awakening to the ancient truth buried deep within themselves. Mary Magdalene's return is not just a historical correction, it is a spiritual awakening, a reminder that our souls carry ancient memories, waiting to be remembered. Memories of a time when spirituality was not controlled by institutions, but lived as a direct, intimate experience of the divine within each heart. Her return is our return to a truth that no power can erase, that the divine light shines equally in every soul and no authority can stand between you and your Creator. So now I ask you, can you feel that ancient call awakening within you? That voice whispering that there's more to your soul's story than you were taught? If so, you are part of this rescue mission, the mission to recover the spiritual treasures stolen from humanity. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate notifications so we can walk this path together, uncovering the lost, forbidden and hidden truths that can restore our spiritual memory. And tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? Your voice is part of this historic and spiritual resurrection. Together, we are bringing back the light that no shadow could extinguish. As we continue to uncover the story of Mary Magdalene and the forbidden gospel that bears her name, it becomes clear that this is not just ancient history. It is a mirror held up to our own time, to our own spiritual search, because the same forces that silenced Mary, fear of inner power, fear of spiritual autonomy, fear of the divine speaking directly to each soul, still operate today. The control of spiritual narratives, the suppression of alternative voices, and the fear of direct mystical experience are not relics of the past. They are part of the present moment. That's why rescuing Mary's voice is about much more than historical justice. It's about reclaiming the right of every human being to seek the divine in their own way. It's about reminding us that spiritual authority does not belong to institutions. It belongs to the soul. When we read the fragments of the Gospel of Mary, we're not just reading ancient text. We're stepping into a conversation that was meant for us, for every seeker who centuries later would feel that same call burning inside. In these fragments, Jesus speaks to Mary not as a distant God, but as a friend, a guide, a fellow traveler on the spiritual path. He entrusts her with teachings that are not about rules and commandments, but about the inner mechanics of the soul, about the illusions that trap us, and about how to awaken to our divine origin. This is not religious control. This is spiritual empowerment. And that's why it was too dangerous to survive the rise of institutional religion. One of the most striking moments in the Gospel is when the other disciples turn against Mary. After she shares the secret teachings Jesus gave her, Peter and Andrew attack her credibility. They say essentially, "Why would the Master reveal these things to you, a woman, and not to us?" This moment is a wound in the history of spirituality, a wound that has never fully healed. It's the moment when spiritual wisdom became a battlefield where gender, hierarchy, and ego tried to silence the voice of direct mystical experience. Mary's answer is courageous and heartbreaking. She does not beg for their approval. She does not apologize for receiving the revelation. She stands in her truth, calmly, firmly, as if to say, the divine light does not ask permission from men before it chooses a vessel. This moment in the Gospel exposes a struggle that is still with us today, the struggle between institutional authority and personal revelation. On one side, the institutional church, with its laws, structures, and claim to exclusive spiritual authority. On the other side, the mystical path, where each soul becomes its own priest, its own temple, and its own sacred scripture. This is not just a theological debate, it's the central spiritual question of our time. Who owns the right to define the divine? Who decides how God can speak, and through whom? Mary's Gospel offers a clear answer. The divine speaks to anyone with an open heart. The sacred does not respect human hierarchies. Spirit flows where spirit wills, and that's why this Gospel, though short and fragmented, holds such revolutionary power. It is a reminder to every woman silenced, every seeker shamed, every mystic labeled a heretic, that spiritual authority belongs to the soul, not to institutions. It also reminds us of something else, something modern spirituality often forgets. The spiritual path is not about comfort. It is not about feeling good or manifesting desires. It is a journey through inner darkness, through the seven powers, through the layers of illusion that cover the light within. This is not a path for the faint of heart. It is a path for those willing to face themselves, to look into the mirror of the soul and not turn away. This is the path Mary walked, not as a saint on a pedestal, but as a human being, full of doubts, fears, and courage enough to walk into the unknown. And here's the real danger of the Gospel of Mary. It reveals that this path belongs to all of us, not just to saints or clergy, to every soul hungry for truth, to every heart willing to listen. It tells us that no one can grant or deny us access to God, because God has always been within us. And this message, even after centuries of suppression, cannot be silenced, because it is not just written in ink on ancient papyrus. It is written in the soul of every seeker. It is the whisper we hear in silence, the longing we feel in our darkest nights, the flame that no doctrine can extinguish. This is why Mary's voice is rising again, not just through historical discoveries, but through our own longing. She comes back to remind us that the path to God was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be walked by each and every soul in its own way, in its own time. So I ask you, the one watching this now, can you feel that voice within you calling you back to the sacred truth that has no gatekeepers? Can you sense that you too are part of this ancient lineage, this lineage of seekers, mystics, and souls who refuse to surrender their inner light to external control? If so, this journey is your journey too. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you can join me as we uncover the next chapters of this forbidden history. And don't forget to tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? Because your voice, your presence is part of this great spiritual return. Together, we are breaking the silence of centuries and remembering the truth that no power could bury forever. When we look at the forbidden Gospel of Mary Magdalene, we're not just reading a lost text. We're witnessing the survival of a dangerous idea, the idea that divine truth cannot be controlled, edited, or owned by any institution. Mary's voice echoes through time as a reminder that spiritual knowledge belongs to everyone, and that every soul, regardless of gender, social status, or religious authority, carries the potential to know God directly. But to understand the full weight of this message, we need to step back and ask, what was at stake for the institutional church? Why was Mary's message so threatening that it had to be erased, distorted, and buried? The answer lies in the fundamental difference between two visions of spirituality, the mystical path and the institutional path. The mystical path, which Mary embodied, teaches that God is within, that the divine is a living presence inside every human being. It teaches that direct experience of God is possible through inner transformation, through silence, through vision, through a radical honesty with oneself. This is a path without gatekeepers. No one can stand between the seeker and the divine. No temple, no priest, no dogma can monopolize the sacred. The institutional path, however, needed control. As Christianity became not just a spiritual movement, but a tool of imperial power, control over access to God became essential. The church positioned itself as the only bridge between heaven and earth, the only interpreter of truth, the only authorized path to salvation. In this system, spiritual power belonged to a small group of men who stood between God and the people. They controlled the sacraments, the scriptures, the rituals, even the definitions of sin and forgiveness. Mary's message shattered this entire structure. If God lives within every soul, no one owns access to God. If each of us can awaken to the divine within, no one can sell us that awakening. This was not just theological rebellion, it was spiritual revolution, and revolutions, especially spiritual ones, are dangerous to empires. This is why Mary's image had to be rewritten. If the public knew she was the bearer of secret teachings, a spiritual master entrusted with mystical truths by Christ himself, the entire foundation of religious hierarchy would crumble. So they turned her into a repentant sinner, someone who needed the church's forgiveness, rather than someone who carried her own authority. They transformed her into an example of what happens when you step outside the approved boundaries. You are labeled, shamed, and reduced. But the irony is this: even in her distorted form, Mary never disappeared completely. Her presence haunted the church's imagination. Artists painted her, poets wrote about her, mystics dreamed of her. Even though her true story was suppressed, her energy could not be extinguished. The sacred feminine, buried for centuries, continued to pulse beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to rise again. And that moment began in 1945, when a group of ancient Gnostic texts was discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. Among them, not only the Gospel of Mary, but also the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and other writings that revealed a completely different Christianity. A Christianity rooted in direct experience, personal revelation, and inner transformation. These texts revealed a forgotten lineage, a Christianity that saw Mary Magdalene not as a sinner, but as a teacher of wisdom, a spiritual equal, or even superior, to the male apostles. They revealed a Jesus who was not concerned with building a religious institution, but with awakening the divine spark in every soul. And at the heart of this mystical Christianity was a truth too dangerous to survive the rise of religious power structures. You do not need anyone to grant you access to God, because God has never left you. This truth, hidden for centuries, is rising again. Not because a church has approved it, but because souls all over the world are awakening, remembering that the light they were taught to seek outside has been shining inside them all along. Mary Magdalene's voice is the voice of every seeker who has ever been told they are not enough, not holy enough, not pure enough, not worthy enough to hear God's voice directly. Her gospel tells you, you were always enough. Your soul was always worthy. The divine has been speaking to you from within since the moment you took your first breath. And that is why this message still matters today, because even now, in a world filled with religious institutions, spiritual influencers, and self-proclaimed gatekeepers of truth, the greatest secret has always been this: the light you seek is already within you. No one can sell it to you. No one can take it away. No one can grant you what was yours from the beginning. Mary Magdalene carried this truth through persecution, through distortion, through centuries of silence. And now, as her gospel returns to the light, she stands as a guide for all of us who are ready to remember. So I ask you now, the one listening to these words, do you feel that ancient memory stirring inside you? That quiet voice saying, you are more than they told you. You are closer to God than you ever imagined. If you do, this is your call, this is your path. This is your time to remember. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you can continue this journey with me. A journey not only into history, but into your own soul. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? Because your voice, your story is part of this great awakening, this moment when the silence of centuries is finally broken. As we dive even deeper into the forbidden gospel of Mary Magdalene, we begin to realize that this is not just a story about the past. It's a message sent across time, a message meant for us, here and now. Because what happened to Mary Magdalene is not just ancient history. It's part of a much larger pattern, a pattern that repeats itself whenever institutions fear the power of direct spiritual experience. Her story is the story of every mystic silenced, every voice that dared to say, God speaks directly to the soul. It's the story of every woman who carried divine wisdom, only to be called a witch, a heretic, a sinner. And it's the story of every seeker who looked within and found the light the world told them they would never be worthy to see. The forbidden gospel is not just a text, it's a spiritual key, a doorway back to a forgotten truth. That truth is this: you are your own sacred text. Your soul is your scripture. Your life is your revelation. You don't need permission to speak to God. You don't need approval to know the truth. You don't need anyone to tell you whether or not you are worthy of divine love, because that love is the core of who you are. This is the truth that terrifies institutions, because institutions depend on your doubt. They depend on you believing that you are broken, lost, in need of external salvation. But Mary's gospel reveals a radical spiritual independence. It says, the kingdom is not in the sky or in the temple, it is within you. The 7 powers Mary describes are not external forces, they are inner illusions. Darkness, desire, ignorance, false joy, spiritual pride, fear, and the rage of the flesh, all of them are obstacles within us, not demons outside us. The battle for salvation is an inner battle, and the final reward is not heaven after death, but the awakening of divine light within the living soul. This teaching changes everything. It means no one can sell you salvation. No one can stand between you and God. No one can define your worth, your path, or your truth. This is the hidden power of the Gospel of Mary. It doesn't just reveal spiritual secrets. It returns spiritual power to where it always belonged, inside you. But the story does not end with Mary, because once we see her truth, we realize something even bigger. Mary Magdalene was not alone. She was part of a forgotten lineage, a long line of wise women, prophets, mystics, and seekers who carried this same message across generations. They appear in ancient temples, in hidden manuscripts, in whispered oral traditions passed from mother to daughter. And they appear today in every person who dares to ask, "What if the divine has been inside me all along?" This is the legacy of the sacred feminine, silenced for centuries, now rising again. And it's not just about women. It's about the feminine energy within every soul, the part of us that feels rather than obeys, creates rather than conforms, listens inwardly rather than seeks approval outwardly. This energy, this wisdom of the soul, is what Mary represents. It's what the institutional church feared, and it's what is awakening right now as more and more people remember that their spiritual birthright was never theirs to lose. This is why the return of Mary Magdalene is not just a discovery, it's a prophecy fulfilled. Because every age of spiritual control is eventually followed by an age of spiritual awakening. And that awakening always begins the same way, with one soul daring to listen to the voice within. That voice is speaking to you now. It's the voice that led you to this moment, to this message, to this remembering. So it's the voice that says, "You are not lost, you are not broken. You are the light you've been searching for." So now I ask you, can you hear that voice? Can you feel the ancient memory waking up inside you? Can you sense that you too are part of this return, this spiritual uprising that no power can stop? If you can, then this is your calling. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you can walk this path with me. The path of remembering what was stolen, reclaiming what was silenced, and restoring what was always yours. And before you leave, write your name and your city in the comments. Because your voice, your presence is part of this great awakening. Together we are breaking the silence and returning to the truth no power could ever truly bury. As we approach the final layers of the forbidden gospel of Mary Magdalene, it becomes clearer than ever. This is not just her story, it is ours. Hers was the first voice they tried to silence, but it was only the beginning of a campaign that stretched across centuries, aimed at burying a far deeper truth. The truth that each human being is a temple, and that the divine does not live in stone buildings or behind golden altars. It lives within the soul itself. This was Mary's message, and because of it, they erased her voice from the official story. But the silence they imposed could never truly hold, because the message itself was never written on paper alone. It was written into the spiritual DNA of humanity itself. That is why you are hearing it now, because the time has come for that memory to awaken again. One of the most profound teachings found in the Gospel of Mary is the idea that salvation is not a transaction. It is not something we earn by obeying rules, nor something granted by external authorities. It is a process of remembering who we were before fear, before guilt, before shame was placed on us. In the forbidden gospel, Jesus teaches Mary that the soul's true journey is not about escaping this world, but about seeing through its illusions. The material world is not evil, but it is a veil, a mask that hides the radiant truth of our divine origin. The purpose of spiritual practice is to pierce the veil, to recover the memory of our divine nature, and to live from that awakened awareness. This is not a theology of control. This is a path of liberation. And Mary herself is the first to walk that path, not as a perfect saint, but as a human being full of questions, fears, courage, and longing. She asks, she doubts, she seeks, and in that seeking, she finds. This is what makes her so dangerous to religious power structures. She does not preach blind faith. She models spiritual bravery, the courage to look within, to ask uncomfortable questions, and to follow the truth wherever it leads. She does not point to herself as the authority. She does not build a temple around her knowledge. She simply stands as a witness, proof that the divine can speak through anyone, no matter who they are. This is why the conflict between Mary and Peter in the Forbidden Gospel is so much more than a personal argument. It is a clash between two visions of spirituality, one mystical, inclusive, and centered on personal revelation, the other hierarchical, controlled, and centered on institutional power. Peter, representing the institutional church, cannot accept that a woman, especially one outside the inner circle of male authority, could receive the highest teachings. But Jesus himself, according to this gospel, chose Mary, not because of her gender, but because her heart was ready. This is the great spiritual secret that religious power fears most. God chooses who God chooses, not based on rank or title, but based on the readiness of the soul. This is the true apostolic succession, not a chain of ordination through bishops and priests, but a lineage of awakened souls, passing the flame of direct revelation from heart to heart. This lineage was never fully broken, even when Mary's name was dragged through the mud, even when her gospel was hidden for centuries. It survived in the hidden mystics, in the desert mothers, in the underground spiritual currents that flowed beneath the surface of institutional religion. It survives today in you, in the quiet, knowing that the divine voice you seek has been whispering inside you all along. That voice, the same voice Mary heard, is still calling you to remember who you are, calling you to let go of the fear, the guilt, the belief that you are unworthy, calling you to reclaim the light that was never lost, only hidden. And this is why the return of Mary Magdalene is not a coincidence. It is part of a larger awakening, a global remembering that no institution can control. Her gospel teaches what every mystic knows, that the divine speaks in silence, that the sacred lives in every breath. That heaven is not above, but within. The kingdom of God is not something to wait for. It is something to become. This is the message they tried to erase, and this is the message that can no longer be silenced. So I ask you now, not as a follower, but as a fellow seeker, do you feel it? That ancient memory awakening in your bones, the memory of a truth too powerful to be owned, too free to be controlled, too beautiful to be hidden forever. If you feel that, if this message stirs something ancient within you, then you are part of this remembering. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so we can continue this journey together, uncovering the hidden truths not just of history, but of your own soul. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what's your name and where are you watching from? Because your voice is part of this great restoration, the moment when the silence of centuries breaks open and the divine light within each soul shines freely again. We have walked together through the shadows of history, uncovering secrets buried not only in ancient manuscripts, but in the very heart of our spiritual inheritance. And now, as we reach the final part of this journey, one truth stands above all others. Mary Magdalene was never just a figure of the past. Her story is alive because her message was never meant for one time or one place. It was meant for every soul who would one day awaken and remember. The Forbidden Gospel of Mary is more than words on a page. It is a mirror held up to every seeker, asking the question that echoes across the centuries: who told you that God was far away? Who taught you that you needed permission to speak to the divine? Who convinced you that the sacred belonged to anyone but you? The real reason this gospel was silenced is not because it denied Christ, but because it dared to reveal something even more dangerous: that Christ came not to create gatekeepers, but to tear down the walls between heaven and earth. He came to remind us that the light he carried was the same light planted in every soul. And Mary Magdalene was the first to understand, and the first to remember. That is why he trusted her with the deeper teachings. Not because she was superior, but because she was ready to see what others could not. This readiness had nothing to do with gender, status, or position. It had everything to do with the courage to look within, to face her own shadows, and to find the divine light waiting there. And that is the message the world was never meant to hear. That the greatest spiritual truth does not come from books, pulpits, or councils. It comes from the silent place within you, where your soul touches the eternal. This is why the institutional church feared Mary's gospel, because if people knew, they could find God within themselves. Without priests, without rituals, without hierarchy, the entire system of religious control would collapse. If the divine could be found in every breath, in every heart, in every act of honest seeking, then no institution could sell, control, or mediate salvation. This is the revolution hidden in her gospel, a revolution that cannot be stopped because it was never based on external power. It was always based on the inner awakening of the soul. Mary Magdalene's forbidden gospel is not just a lost text, it is a prophecy fulfilled in us. Every soul who dares to seek the divine within, who listens for the voice that no one else can hear, becomes part of the living gospel that no counsel can erase. Every time you choose inner truth over external authority, every time you trust the wisdom rising from your own soul, every time you remember that you were born already worthy, already whole, already one with the divine, you are continuing the legacy they tried to bury. So now I ask you one final time, do you feel it, that ancient call, and the one that says, you are more than they told you? The light you seek is already inside you, and the truth you were taught to fear is the truth that will set you free. If you feel it, even if it's only a whisper, then you have found your place in this story, because this is not the end of the journey. It is only the beginning. The Gospel of Mary has returned, not just to be studied, but to be lived. It returns in you, in every question you dare to ask, in every truth you refuse to silence, in every moment you choose to walk your own path back to the divine. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate notifications, not just to follow this story, but to continue this path of remembering. And one last time, I want to hear from you. What's your name and where are you watching from? Because your voice matters, your story matters, and together we are breaking the silence of centuries and reclaiming the light no power could bury forever. The Gospel of Mary was forbidden, but truth cannot be forbidden forever. It rises now through you.